Hey everybody, welcome to the fourth episode of the Schlopshow. I'm talking to Denshi, also known as Alex. He's a Linux content creator, and he also is Catholic. This was recorded before the death of the Pope and the election, I guess, of the new Pope. And so we don't discuss that at all here. This isn't the normal schlop show where we talk about security or anything of that nature. And so, if you're interested in that topic, um, this is probably not the talk for you. We mainly talk about some things in Linux and faith. So, if you're interested in that, stick with us. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for asking. How about you?
I'm doing all right. I can't believe that I made such a rookie mistake, but yeah, it happens, I
That's
guess.
okay. It happens to all of us.
Yeah, yeah, it works much better now. With the settings, the OBS
Oh,
settings that I
nice.
have now, so it's
Nice.
nice. Yeah, I just like recently started using DaVinci Resolve. I was using like Kdenlive and other open source editors, but then I was like, the rendering times are like way too long for me, so I'm like, I can't do
Yeah.
it.
Then live, I think if you switch it to using NVIDIA rendering, it tends to be pretty good. But NVIDIA rendering is super like fragmented and bad unless you have a newer card like a 20 series or a 40
Mm,
series. So I remember I used to use it back on my old computer that had a 1050 and like a laptop, and it would render videos really fast, but they would come out really like first the file sizes would be so big
yeah,
and the file quality would not be the same as the file sizes.
yeah, exactly. Oh man. I feel like it's always. I mean, it's getting better at least.
Yeah.
I feel like that's like an issue I have with like open source software. Sometimes is like you always like. I guess that's one of the reasons why people don't switch to Linux right away is because they think that their entire workflow will change, and so they won't have the applications that they need to get their work done. But I don't like. Started using Linux like a couple years ago. Actually, it's been quite a while now. It's been like 3 or 4 years, and
Hmm.
like I was able to make like a pretty much like a complete switch, and it didn't change too much for my workflow. But I don't know. It depends if you use like Adobe and stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think part of the sacrifice is just learning how to do a different workflow. I think
yeah,
that's just part of the experience, and I think it's a good sacrifice to make, because it gives you the freedom of having Linux. I kind of had it in the back of my head ever since I was younger. Like I always had a bit of a distrust for Windows and Mac OS, and I always wanted to move to Linux ever since
mm,
I tried it when I was about maybe 11 or so. I always really liked it, but I was waiting for the gotcha moment, or I was for the opposite of the gotcha moment, I guess. I was waiting for the year of the Linux desktop when they would finally bring in the stuff that I wanted. And I
mm,
think that happened when they started doing the Proton stuff because
yeah.
back then I was like 13 or like 12 and I was really into video games and I was like, "Well, man, this is great and all, but like I want to be able to play, man, I don't even remember what it was cuz um
Proton has
yeah,
gone a long way, right? So like now you can do
to be
basically
fair,
all
yeah.
gaming. Yeah,
Nowadays it works. It works and it works better. But nowadays I don't play video games anymore, so it's gotten so much better. But I don't even get to use it. I
yeah.
think it's kind of. I think people like Luke Smith make a really good point when they go out there and say, "What's the point of installing Linux if all you're gonna do is the first thing you do is just install Steam? Like
Yeah.
you're just putting back on the shackles of slavery after trying to free yourself by using something which helps you get stuff done." I think the lack of functionality in Linux in many ways is actually a feature because
Mm,
it forces you to like shut up and not do all this silly little entertaining stuff and actually do work. I get like maybe like your friends are over and you want to play a game and like it doesn't work on your computer, like stuff like that makes sense.
yeah.
But most of the time, a lot of this stuff is like, yeah, man, do you really need Steam to like live? Probably not. But yeah, professional software is a lot more concerning though, because you actually do need that to live. Stuff like, stuff you use for work.
Yeah.
DaVinci Resolve, I was very surprised to figure out, was developed originally for Linux. Like it was only ported over later. It was actually made for CentOS, which is
Mm.
cool.
I didn't actually know that. That's actually kind of cool, and it's like
At least
industry standard too.
yeah, yeah, no, it's really good. And it's I think they run it on CentOS on like in Hollywood and stuff. Either that or macOS tend to be the most common. You pretty much never see Windows in Hollywood settings.
I was just wondering, like, what do you fill the void with? Because like a lot of people, they go from like gaming a lot, and like same with me, right? Like, I used to play a lot of video games, and I still do actually. And like so, like, what do you do to like transition into like playing less video games, doing more with your life, that kind of stuff? Because it's easy to just like say that like you shouldn't play video games, but you also have to like replace it with something else. It is like a part of like
I
addictions
mean,
in a way.
yeah, I wouldn't say go stop playing video games and start smoking like 50 packs every day or something like that. Definitely not. But we have to remember that, first of all, we have ridiculous, like absolutely obscene amounts of recreational time nowadays, at least if you're working a more average job. We have like obscene amounts of time where we can just sit down, even during work. I don't know what study it was, but I remember hearing from one priest that it's like maybe 60% of people's time at most jobs is spent looking at their phone and like looking at random stuff. It's we have so much free time nowadays, and we kind of have this expectation that, "Oh, we need to watch YouTube, we need to, like, play games, we need to text our friends," but really, that time should be used for something that is genuinely nurturing, whether it's physical or mental work or prayer as well. I mean, remember, the faith, at least the Catholic religion, technically does call not really laity as much, but priests up until Vatican II, they had to pray 7 times a day, and they're not short prayers, it's like good 25 to 30-minute prayers 7
Hmm.
times a day, and us as the laity, we can do that too. There's, like, minified versions of most of those liturgical prayers known as the well, some people call them hours, some people call them the more proper name would be a divine office, because it's what you do throughout the day, and that's really people's days were you back then were composed of you woke up in the morning, you prayed, you went to work, normally a more
Hmm.
physical work, you prayed again, you did more work, you went to bed, probably had like a nap in the middle of the day, woke up again, prayed the evening prayer, worked a little bit more, prayed again, had dinner, went to bed. So like it was a much more you were living this life that was symbiotic with God and nature. And that's like the ultimate goal of people. I think anybody trying to get out of the system, quote unquote,
Hmm.
that's what you should be aiming for. It's not hard. You don't just get it all on day one. I definitely don't have it now,
Hmm.
but I think having that in mind, once you have that like clear mental image of that, it's easy to know what are the next steps to take. You kind of immediately know like, oh, can't do that anymore because that would not fit in a life like that. So I'd say if you were quitting games, replace that time with something I mean, I'd say spiritually nurturing, prayer, just even stuff that you can do with your friends in person, going out to do something. It's very nice. I live in the South, and I live in somewhere that's not too urban,
Hmm.
but not too rural either, kind of like a small, semi-industrialized town,
Do you
and
have
I'm
like a lot of
still able to
hobbies?
have I guess so. I have friends who live nearby me, and we're often able to go out and do things and go to places, and it's really nice. In terms of hobbies, I mean, I still do a lot of the stuff that I do on for my videos, and I am still editing videos and working through that. That does take
Hmm.
up a lot of my time, but most of it honestly is just studying and working on like on-campus organizations, little things like that.
Yeah.
Purely recreational things. I guess I exercise and do a I used to do a lot of swimming. I haven't done it recently because it's been really cold, but back in the summer, I used to go swimming a lot, and I actually used to swim in high school, but I actually yeah, I used to do, like, races and stuff when I was younger, but not anymore, so I kinda been trying to get back into that. I think a good physical activity is what a lot of people could use, especially something, like, that can be turned into something competitive, even on a
Hmm.
low level. But, yeah, I mean, if I were giving advice to somebody who's like, "Man, I should quit video games," I'd say the way that I viewed it when I was like 15 or whatever, I was like, this isn't really fun anymore. And yeah, I mean, I started doing other things, many of which that were, ways of wasting time as well. But having that mental image in mind of like my ultimate end goal is like theosis. My ultimate end goal is like getting to a level where I have more virtue in my life, where I can wake up in the morning and I don't think about these worries and I don't think about these things and I can literally be in peace and pray. That's something which if you don't have that frame of mind kinda building, then you're gonna be lost. You're gonna just, like, what's the word? You're gonna relapse straight into,
Hmm.
gaming for, like, 5 hours a day. And I know this well because one of my relatives, I won't say who, but one of my relatives is really into this kinda gaming all the time. And he would spend hours upon hours upon hours playing video games. I think it was like Hearts of Iron 4 and like War Thunder, which are
Hmm.
the biggest time sink, like awful games possible. And it was just abysmal. It was eating his life away. And then he began to realize, like, yeah, like this isn't even really making me happy, you know? And it took a while, but eventually he started doing other things. He started going out and exercising and talking to people and talking to girls and things like that, and life got a lot more life picked up a lot more, you know, because everything is out there, like, the whole life if you look on the internet and try to go and talk about anything, everybody's like, "Oh, no, things have gotten so bad, everyone's so terrible, everybody's mean." It's like, you're seeing an extremely small fragment of society that's been purposefully picked out to
Hmm.
be agitprop, you know what I mean? It's all agitation propaganda, like what the Soviets used to do. You turn on the internet, and what do you see? You turn on the news even, and what do you see? Oh, this awful stuff is happening. This terrible thing is occurring, so on and so forth. It's made to make you this vegetative, like absolutely mentally like incapable being with no determination and no ambition.
And so
But if
this
you
applies to
literally
like anything, right? So like if it's not just gaming, this is like
oh
like
yeah,
any
yeah,
type of
there's other
addiction
things
that you
too.
may have, right?
I still struggle with a lot of that stuff because I will still occasionally find myself going like, "Oh, you know what? I'm gonna check like a YouTube channel that I haven't checked in a while." And I'll go and
Hmm.
before you know it, I've spent like
Just binge
45
watching.
minutes watching a video about it.
Yeah. um, you were like I was looking at one of your videos, and you were talking about how
Uh,
we're taking AI and we're trying to create God with it. And I was wondering about
fair
that.
enough, I guess.
Like what are your opinions on AI and like where we're going forward with that, I guess? Cuz that's like the I guess what everybody's like interested in right now. Even though
It's
I
like
don't
a hot
really
it'll give you a really good excuse to put those tags in your video description and, like, your
exactly.
video metadata, which will get you a lot of engagement, because that's what everybody's looking up and searching up on the internet
I mean, I
these
don't
days.
even understand. Like, I actually don't even understand AI, and I use AI a lot for like
That's fair.
getting
Well, I
work
mean,
done
the
sometimes.
easy
But
way to understand it is it's sorry. If you wanna get technical, I'm not super advanced in the subject, but if you
mhm,
wanna get technical, it's really just imagine a nth dimensional vector space, and you just put in a vector, and you find whatever vector in that nth dimensional space is closest to it,
mhm,
and then based off that, you look at all the different dimensions. And that's when they talk about like the size of their models or like the precision. It just means how many knobs can you turn on this. So, like for example, most text-based AI like ChatGPT or whatever, it'll look at a letter or like two letters or a bunch of letters going up in your sentence of what your question is, and then after having studied like the entirety of human writing up until a certain point of everything they could get their hands on, they're like, "Oh, the massive model we've built tells us that after passing in all these letters and turning the knobs just about the right way, we've ended up with these coordinates on this nth dimensional space. And
mhm,
what's the closest vector we know of in the next like nth dimensional space? It's right near it. Oh, it's this random one. And apparently, you just keep doing this more and more and more and train it with more and more data, and it just starts speaking like a human. I don't know. It seems like sorcery, but that is how it works. Like mathematically, it's so big that once you get to that level, the results are pretty much unpredictable. but the idea is it reaches a critical mass of data and is just able to answer anything you want, which is crazy. Anyways, unnecessary nerd nitpicking, like super like deep delve that nobody wanted aside, let's get into the social ramifications, the stuff that people actually care about. At the end of the day, my biggest fear with it is that it used to be that media was slowed down by humanity's ability to create media. So if I
Hmm.
wanted to put a video out there promoting horrible things, I actually had to go sit down and film myself talking about horrible things. If I wanted to make a video out there, like literally the entirety of like the explicit video industry, all of those explicit videos, they're limited by the fact that somebody actually had to go and produce those,
Yeah.
and money had to be exchanged and whatnot to produce those. And now we've enslaved multiple generations of men and an increasing number of women to this. Now imagine that, but we can produce it literally in the blink of an eye with a computer that's powerful enough to literally make any image you desire. So I think I wasn't trying to go directly at that in the video. I don't mention pornography in the video, but it is sort of also what I'm getting at. That and pretty much everything else. Like imagine combining that with VR where you could now be like, "Oh, you know what? I don't want to." The way that people treat media nowadays, like Marvel movies, I don't want to think. I want to turn off my brain for 3 hours.
It's because
I'm
we
just
want to
gonna watch the.
satiate ourselves, right? And like we're kind of
Yeah,
just
I mean,
consuming and
it's
we
even
want
I
that
wouldn't
material.
even call it satiate because satiate implies that you actually feel better by the end of it. But
Mm,
with something like watching a Marvel movie, I did it once. I remember because it was one of my friends' birthday when I was a kid, and we all went to the cinema to watch this big Marvel movie. And I was like, I had never seen any of them before, and I was like, that was like the worst thing ever. I feel so weird after watching that.
yeah, I guess
But
it's like an
anyway,
endless hunger, right? So you're
well,
always
I mean,
craving
it's
for more.
slop. It's
Yeah.
slop, right? It's just like a
Yeah.
good guy beating up a bunch of bad guys, and guess what? The good guy wins. Oh wow! And it's like a bunch of corny reused jokes. But anyways, you have that, right? Imagine that, but like we can produce it. We don't have to wait for a producer. We don't have to wait for actors. We don't have to wait for anything. Obviously, the AI isn't at that level yet, but we'll get there. There was one artist, I forget exactly. I think I might have quoted it in the video, but I remember hearing about this when people were first beginning to complain about the AI. This is a couple of years ago, and
Hmm.
somebody said, "We're pretty close. We're pretty close to the level where we could realistically send an AI through all of your family photos and make like a movie about your life, for example, or like make a movie based off like dead relatives of yours coming back to life, or like just like take information of your life and turn it into something that can be generated overnight by your phone, and then in the morning they're like, "Oh, look at this. We made a TV show about you and your friends." And it's
Mm,
like it's such an insane thing, but it's really where the technology is leading us to. None of this matters though because the specifics of it don't matter. At the end of the day, all it is it's going to make people more and more glued to their screens. Social media, media in general, pornography as well, it's limited. Like there's a cap on it because, like I said, people actually do have to put in effort to make it. But because we have such low standards for media, especially nowadays, once the AI gets good enough to pass as human and even not pass as human, people will start consuming that content and be like, "Oh, that's pretty cool." And at some point, we'll get to the point where the AI prompts itself and is able
mhm,
to produce content based off itself to the point where it can tune itself to your preferences and create videos that are personally, especially made for you, which means that that dopamine fall off of, oh, I can't find anything I like to watch on YouTube. I'm going to stop watching YouTube. That's going to be less and less of an occurrence because at some point, YouTube's going to just start making videos for the sake of getting more engagement from you. So that was the idea I was trying to get across in that video. When I say that we're trying to recreate God, I think in the capacity of creator, right? Because
mhm.
we're like with a lot of stuff, obviously, right? But in a way, like nuclear weapons and all that is just trying to yield a small part of God's wrath. But with AI, it's we're yielding the creative abilities of God. God has created the world and humans being made in the image of God, man being made in the image of God, is also a creative creature who's able to go and create things out of God's creation, right? And now
Mhm.
we're introducing this AI, which at least to our eyes, to our human understanding, is able to create, right? Is able to create things. I guess we could view it much in the same way that animals create dams, like beavers create dams, or like ants create ant hills. Although we view it as it having creativity, whatever.
Mhm.
But that's when I talk about it being God, I mean it in that sense. I mean it in the sense that there'll come a day where you'll be able to put a VR headset on and go into a completely artificially created world that an AI creates to your exact specifications. And we'll get stuff like that because people are just infinitely bored and in need of satiation. But not real satiation, like I said. But yeah,
Yeah,
that's
that
kind of what I meant to get across in that video.
that endless hunger. And I was just wondering, like, with all this consumerism that's going on, right? How does it make
Uh-huh.
sense? Like, how are we going to continue as a society if all we're doing is self-deprecating and making us waste time and not really being as productive as we could be and not being efficient? How is it going to translate to a better world in the future if we're
Uh,
continually
so no, I get what you mean. I would like to not phrase it in the way of productivity and efficiency because those are like
Mhm.
industrial terms that are like really not what humans are made for. Like we're not made to be, at least in the way that we understand it nowadays. Like oh,
Yeah,
you produce this much for your boss. That's not real human productivity. Real human productivity is being able to feed your family,
yeah.
being able to like provide for your children, your wife, and your cousins and whatnot. That's productivity. That's what God put us on the earth to do, to subdue it and to provide for ourselves. Suffer while doing it, yes, but to provide for ourselves. In fact, it's because we're not actually doing this and instead being far productive, like being working jobs that aren't real,
It's like
doing
pseudo.
things that really
Yeah,
aren't, yeah,
yeah.
like inconsequential things that we are so punished, we were so suffering. So when it comes to that, at the end of the day, it's not even that complicated. Simply put, the people who are not the people who are not interested in living out a more traditional lifestyle, so to speak, a more human lifestyle, really, are just not having children. It's just the fact of the matter that, likely speaking, those who are genuinely interested in straying away from these negative and nihilistic, many times, anti-natalist attitudes are themselves going to be having children, while the people who have those attitudes naturally will not be having children, which means that in 50, 100 years, they'll be like physically gone. Like they literally will not be alive, which means that the only people left will be those people who are interested in those things. So I think it's already happening right now because if you look at the statistics, the latest generations are beginning to get
That
kind
is
of like
actually
reversed.
something that's interesting, is that like populations, like the way that populations actually work, like the exponential decrease of a population can happen over just a few generations, right? And so like you can go from, I don't know, like 27 million to 3% of that in just a couple generations. Like, for example, Korea, like where they're headed, at least with their replacement rate, it's not great, right? So that's like a pretty dystopian
Yeah, I mean,
reality.
I'm not too concerned about the numbers. I don't really
Mhm.
care about the numbers because it doesn't matter. Like if you put your faith in God and stuff, like it's irrelevant whether all these people are alive or not. It doesn't really affect you. These obsessive fantasies and like delusions of this globalist like people like Bill Gates who are like, oh man, there's too many humans on Earth. Like nobody really cares. At the end of the day, right? All that's gonna happen is, yeah, we could look at individual countries and be like, "Oh, that population is decreasing, that population's increasing." But all that matters is really you, your family, your community, all that stuff. Everything else outside of that, the world can do whatever it wants to do. It's really irrelevant. So, I think that focusing too much on these trends, especially when they don't relate to you, aren't super important. At the end of the day, the pattern which I wish more people would recognize is that, simply put, the way things are going, especially in most Western countries, you're simply not gonna have people with these neoliberal attitudes of, "Oh, it's okay to, like, live this weird, like, debauchery lifestyle, this, you know, it's okay to go and waste your life and waste your youth. It's okay to go and, like, do all these bad things." That attitude is slowly dying out, and we're seeing it in the statistics where the younger generations are more and more inclined. I thought there was, like, a poll recently that was like the younger generations are more and more inclined towards having a positive opinion of marriage, which is one of those institutions which has been slowly declining, in the West for the past 200 years or so. And
Mhm.
now we're actually beginning for the first time to see a sort of level off in people's attitudes in terms of religiosity, in terms of Christianity. There was one poll that I just saw that was the level of like people who declare themselves as Christian nominally, whatever that means, right? At least the statistics show that it has leveled off, that it's not decreasing anymore as it used to be. It's actually leveled
Mhm.
off, which is kind of crazy. But that's because the new generation, the only people who thought it worthwhile to have kids in the past generation, to some extent, were those who actually cared about the values of having kids. I can't speak for every couple, obviously, right? But especially those where the parents are still together, most of those couples, if they had more neoliberal attitudes, would have divorced. So when you see a couple that's like of a Gen X sort of age and they're still together from their whole life during marriage, chances are they probably had some serious religious and moral foundation behind that. My parents are like that. You know, my mother always had a very expressed desire to have children, and she even would say stuff like, if she couldn't have five children, she would have adopted five children. You know, like a strong motherly instinct,
Mhm.
because the boomers before them had such an anti-traditional attitude with stuff like the sexual revolution and whatnot, a pro-pleasure attitude really. Because of that, you ended up having this decline in people of the Gen X generation who actually wanted to have kids. So the few ones that actually did, and the few ones of those that actually had a lot of kids, are the ones who held on to those values, who carried the torch. And so their kids, which tend to be the millennials, Gen Z, and Gen Alpha kids that we're seeing now, all those people are going to have a bit of a better formation than like the boomers and the some older millennials and whatnot. Like you just see it right in front of you everywhere. At least everywhere I go, especially here in the South, you see it where the younger people are the ones who are more on fire about the faith. They're more on fire about the importance of the traditional values. They're more on fire about even some of the political causes and whatnot. It's simply put because there's fewer of them, but the few ones that are there are the ones which basically made it through the fire, who made it through all the debauchery of the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s because their parents and their grandparents cared enough to actually make it so that they would be born. And so you people, what I would say to everybody who cares about this stuff, like, don't worry. At the end of the day, we know the conclusion, Christ wins, but we also know that merely like scientifically speaking, that sounds so Reddit tier, like scientifically speaking, but you know what I mean. We just look at it like at face value. Who is having kids? Not the liberals. They're not having kids. If they're having kids, it's out of pity. It's not like they're just going to have abortions. They're going to commit these horrifying sins. The liberals are not having kids. It's going to be the people who actually care to some degree about the kids who are having kids, especially in the upper classes. So I would say don't worry about it because at the end of the day, we can sit down and like doom ourselves all the time. But really, the only responsibility, first of all, we have is to our own soul. And then that responsibility extends to everyone else, like your wife and your children. But that's who it extends to. It doesn't go to everybody else. So don't have this obsessive apocalyptic worry because that's exactly what the globalist attitude wants to put in you. They want to put in you this over concern for people that really are irrelevant to you. As nice and warm feeling as it make some people feel, it really does not matter. So yeah, it's tragic that countries like South Korea, Japan, and even my own country, Italy, is basically dying off. But at the end of the day, right, I know what the conclusion is. It's all going to lead to a society which is probably going to have a lot stronger values by the end because the people who are dying off are the people who didn't care enough to have the kids, to sacrifice, to suffer, which is really what we're all called to, is to suffer. So, yeah, that's why I don't really worry about it.
I I disagree with you on some parts. Um, one of the parts is I like isolationism, and so like I don't think that that is necessarily the correct way to go about. Like obviously, I do understand what you mean. Is like in your own like circle, in your own bubble, what matters most is your circle, right? At the end of the day, what you do in your like tiny group of people, your community, it's gonna have very little impact on the greater society at large, and so you shouldn't have to worry about what's going on around you on a global scale, right? But I do think that there is we do need a certain level of globalization and like globalism. I guess I don't know exactly the term. I don't know if globalism is even like the correct term. It's simply like a trade thing for me. Is like
Yeah,
you
it's
we
globalization.
yeah, globalization, and so like you we always want to like have freer trade and like I like at this point in society, it's no longer as beneficial to have wars and to like take from other people. Instead, it's better to just trade, right? And so, like having an isolationist mindset and thinking that um, you're going to be bringing in wealth by having less free trade and by doing those types of things. I think it's kind of counterproductive in a way, but it's one of those things that will like pan out in like the next like couple hundred years. Obviously, like that's just like something that I look at like historically, and I just realize like okay, this isn't exactly the way to progress. Also, when you talk about liberals and liberalism, I think that there's like a weird thing about the word liberal now is that it doesn't mean what it used to mean, which is simply just like free, right? And so like when I think of the word liberal, like actually think of the word liberal, I think of just like free. I don't think of like political like anything to do with like politics or anything like that. I think of literally just being freer. And so like in a way, I guess it doesn't really make sense totally because conservatism doesn't necessarily mean that you're less free, but it just means that you have a more conservative mindset, right? So you value traditionalism more if you're conservative. But I don't know. Like, what is your thought process when you say the word liberal? Liberal, do you think like simply like political and like how our generations are becoming more and more free in this way, and then they're becoming more, I guess, uh, I don't want to say evil, but it is kind of in the way that you describe it is debauchery and things like that that are happening simply because of more free mindset, I guess. Uh, yeah,
So
neo.
I'll address the globalization part first.
Mhm.
If you go to like a rural village in Bangladesh, they're not very affected by the trade agreements between Bangladesh and India. If you go to the Amish, I don't think the Amish could care less about the trade wars between the US and Canada. So when somebody lives, so I mentioned earlier this idea of working towards a life where you can pray 7 times a day, and that I think also should include some level of I'm going to go like real Luke Smith mode here, but like some level of independence
Mm.
to the point where you are able to support yourself independent of quote the system. I mentioned it at the beginning, this idea of exiting the system.
Yeah.
That a big part of that is economic and not relying on an economic system to provide you with food and shelter and whatnot. There's an extent to which you can nearly never detach from it in your lifetime, at least nowadays in the 21st century. But I think none of this should concern you if you want to it goes back to what I was saying about, like, don't listen to the news, don't listen to the media because it's agitprop, but it's also gonna make you start thinking about topics which are really not relevant. Yeah, I would understand if somebody working in government or somebody who works in a big business that deals with international trade would want to keep tabs on trade agreements and globalization and whatnot. But if you're the kind of person trying to escape the industrial system, trying to escape all of these things, which we agree are bad, then it does make sense to want to limit this. the idea of worrying about America and even these other countries as a nation and worrying about them having certain trade agreements and certain whatever is really like we shouldn't even we've gotten to such like a past level where like we've gone so far with it that that's even ridiculous we're discussing it in the first place. Like all it will have, like I don't know, better trade with China. Oh, now I can more easily get little plastic trinkets and tools from China, which are cheaper. Like maybe they're $10 cheaper at Home Depot or wherever I'm gonna buy them. That's you shouldn't be buying stuff from Home Depot in the first place. You shouldn't be using industrial tools in the first place. You're meant to be like on a farm working with like animals and stuff. Like that's what humans are made for. So in the end, like the like end goal of anybody who's trying to be more independent in those things, none of this stuff should really matter. You can use them as stepping stones on the way to freedom, but like even having a discussion about that, it's like it's really irrelevant because worrying about the trade agreements between one country and another is really not going to profit you anything. Anyways, to the liberal question, I think that your definition of liberal is still pretty bad though, because having somebody be free to do anything is how you end up with a satanic society in the first place. That's what Satan was. It's what that's Luciferian. He goes out and says, "I will not serve." I will not serve God. It's not a I will give myself the option whether to or whether not to serve God every day. No, it's I will not serve God. Right. So you have this very clear attitude from Lucifer that's saying I completely refuse to have an authority over me. That's liberalism. Even the classical liberalism, even the liberalism of World War One, even the liberalism of the French Revolution, all of these are evil. They're all evil because they oppose the order of God, which is fundamentally ordered, where there are rules and there are, laws put in place for justice. Liberal societies still have these, but instead of orienting them towards Christ and giving the social kingship of Christ, they instead orient them towards man, towards the benefit of man. That's why liberal societies allow stuff like pornography. They, liberally distribute stuff like explicit material and allow people to go and do things which were completely unthinkable in the societies that preceded them. And that attitude of the French Revolution, that attitude of, oh, we must like the Enlightenment in general, which is like, oh, we must understand and like codify and like perfectly rationalize everything. It's an atheistic and a satanic attitude. So it's what leads to disorder. It ultimately leads to it. Maybe on the way there, there's moments that seem really good. Like, I don't know, a lot of people, they like to idealize the 1950s and the 1930s and 1940s and like whatever, all these olden times because they're like, oh, wow, look at how much better people used to dress and act and be, and they were kinder and they were more trusting. We lived in higher trust communities, all this kind of stuff, right? But all of that has led to today. So we can't look at that and be like, "Oh, that's all good," because in those moments, in all of those pictures of the 1950s, they were constructing the ladder which would bring us to where we are today, which is much like considerably worse. So having this idea of like, oh guys, no, the old liberalism was good. It's only the new liberalism that was bad. It doesn't make sense because trying to say that being free is neutral inherently isn't a fact. Like you cannot be neutral and believe in this idea of absolute freedom because if people are given absolute freedom, what's going to happen? They're going to descend. They're going to descend into chaos once you give them that freedom. It's just the natural consequence of it. And it's what
Mhm.
we've seen since the French Revolution. So, yeah, I mean it's an attractive thing to say, right? Like, "Oh, no, it was better when I don't know, Woodrow Wilson was doing his liberalism, which was about self-determination and all of these cool values." But all of that self-determination led to where we are today, where there's widespread debauchery, there's abortion, there's contraception, there's, like euthanasia of people in Canada. They permit euthanasia, they encourage euthanasia. It's ridiculous. All of this stuff, it's all what that liberalism, this idea of I will not serve. I will it's not just about like I'll give people the choice to serve. It's like I will not. If you don't serve, you fall into that. It doesn't matter how good the intentions are. All of this like liberal attitude, it naturally leads to that. As mild as it is, your children will be more liberal than you, and their children will be more liberal than them, and so on and so forth, until we end up with a society that's like the way that it is now. So it's a slippery slope, and having that attitude in the first place, it's impossible. There's a really good picture that I like that depicts this. It's like classical reasoning, modern reasoning, and postmodern reasoning. And then classical reasoning, it's a picture of a dot, and it says the dot is there, it stays there because God put it there. And then it says modern reasoning, and it's a picture of an arrow going up, and it says this is what progress looks like. It's going to keep going up forever and ever and ever. And then it goes to postmodern thinking, and it just shows a complete like jumbled mess of lines, and it says it's like a bunch of gibberish basically. And it's like that's what we've fallen into, because the first one is what we're meant to be. The second one is a prelude to the third one. So yeah, it's easy to say. Like I used to be like that a lot too. I used to be like, "Oh, you know what? We should just go back to how liberalism used to be." But then I realized that doesn't matter, because any ideology that like allows itself to be changed like that is dangerous. The only quote ideology that matters is an ideology that is eternal. And the only eternal ideology is that of Christ, the social kingship of Jesus Christ, crowning Christ as king of society. That's what matters.
So I wanted to ask one last question on this topic. Is just if liberalism and like so like my definition of liberalism is just simply like freedom, I guess. And so like I guess I can understand how freedom can devolve into chaos because that is like the nature of humans to tend towards chaos and
Uh,
and
uh,
I guess
yeah,
like
sort of.
it in
Yeah.
like the way that entropy and like things and like the universe just works, we tend to
I guess
devolve
it's
in some
original
ways.
sin. It leaves a stain on the on humanity,
And
and the
so like
original sin, even after baptism, right?
yeah,
It still leaves those like bad. It leaves those bad inclinations, yeah, towards sin.
the question is just simply like why do we have free will if it is to be absolute in our I guess free and if it's to be absolute in our servitude, if that makes sense. So like
So it is the paying of the ransom for the iniquities of man and the sins of man, the incarnation, the crucifixion, right? The crucifixion specifically, and so Christ crucified dies, and that death that it is consummated, it goes and it heals the rip between man and God. So man falls away from God in original sin. Eve and Adam eat of the fruit and stain the entirety of humanity, all of their children, with original sin. And then that original sin is taken away at baptism because of Christ's crucifixion and his reversal of Adam. Adam sinned via a tree, Christ is crucified on the wood of a tree. It's the reversal, right? And so God gave us that free will, not really for sin, but he gave us that part of this all being part of God's plan is to permit the crucifixion, the incarnation, and especially permit the crucifixion to be as glorious as it is, to be as much of a beautiful thing as it is. That's a very, very shorthand response to that. I mean, to understand that, it would take a lot of, yeah, I mean, it would take a lot of virtue and like study to really understand something as deep as that. But
and
at
so
the end
like
of the day, if you, yeah, go ahead.
my next question would simply be like if we all have an amount of sin because of original sin, right? And so like I guess baptism would help
Yeah,
reduce
baptism
that.
washes away
Wa-
original sin. Original sin is completely gone after baptism, but the stain of original sin remains after, and that's what gives you the inclinations. Really, the concupiscible appetite is one of the main things which is left over. Like this desire for pleasure, this desire. It doesn't leave you because it is something which is remained from original sin. The sin itself is gone. The
Mhm.
offense against God is gone. You're not guilty of it. But like if you baptize somebody, which can only be done once in their lifetime, if you baptize somebody and they die immediately after the baptism, they go directly to heaven because they're clean of all sins after that baptism. But the original sin itself, even after you're baptized, obviously people still sin after they're baptized because it retains a your soul retains a stain from that.